Welcome to Renewables Unscripted. Today, we're extremely lucky to be talking to yet another fascinating entrepreneur who's moving decarbonization forward. James, who are we talking to today?
Today, we have the exciting time to speak to Angella Rainford. She's really stepped it up and taken the renewables to the Caribbean, a market that people never thought would be cracked, but she's really made a case for it and really made a name for herself and her company, Seleco. Let's welcome Angella.
So, Angella, just by way of introduction, nice to meet you. I don't think we've met before.
No, nice meeting you as well.
So this is meant as a conversation more than a question and answer and so on. So feel free to throw back questions at us and make this kind of dynamic. I have kind of some ideas where this conversation may go, but they never end up that way. James can attest to that. Which makes the beauty of it. It's about talking about the journey that you are on rather than specific points in time. So
sure.
To think about sharing nuggets that can inspire others or others can learn from, that's really kind of the end goal of this series.
Stories about the entrepreneurial journey and how it's not
straight line.
That's exactly. And the
No
fact
problem.
that you're running another company already is a testament to that.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we just start there. So we have Recamniar. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this
you
correctly.
didn't butcher it. Yeah, you got it. Well done.
Okay. Well, that was my goal for this interview, really, to pronounce things properly.
Right.
We have Soléco, so two different companies, one utility scale, one DG. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on what these companies are achieving right now?
Sure. So Recamniar, and well done on trying to pronounce it. And there's a whole story behind the name. It is not Nordic or Icelandic, as some people may believe it to be. But no, so basically I created on the back of an opportunity to basically develop utility scale projects in the Caribbean. Specifically, we ended up winning a project in Jamaica, but we didn't win the first time, which I think James knows. It was definitely an up and down journey. And Recamniar, if you want to know, is actually Rainmaker spelled backwards. So don't judge me on that one. But because my last name is Rainford, and
that's awesome.
I worked for it. So at undergrad at Harvard, there's basically like a student-run company, and we each have our little companies that we ran. And my nickname was Rainmaker because my last name was Rainford. Another guy's nickname, I don't want to call him out too much, but his nickname was BJ. But let's not go too naughty with that one. But that was his basically nickname, was the initials of his full name. So and then another guy was called Murph. And so we all had monikers basically. So when I wanted to create my first company, I thought, let me go back to where I actually had been an entrepreneur the last time, which was when I was in college. And that's how I came over with Rainmaker, but Rainmaker is so common. Everyone basically has a Rainmaker. So I flipped it around and got this unpronounceable name.
Good. I wanted to ask you that. I wanted to ask you that because I Googled Recamniar. I was like, okay, maybe it's a location. Maybe it's a plant. Maybe it's something that I know nothing about. So thank you for answering that question because I was curious.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that there have been a few persons who guessed it. And some of them are really, they're actually really proud of themselves. They're like, you know what? I actually know where that comes from. I know you're trying to be cheeky and cute, but no, actually I know where it comes from. But no, so that was Recamniar, genesis of that. And then after we developed the utility scale project in Jamaica, one of the investors who I met on that journey said, well, if you want to do something else, I'd be happy to back you. And I started looking at the DG space, distributed power. So rather than waiting years, and I'm happy I didn't wait because Jamaica is basically running 7 years, 7 years later, they haven't held another tender. So the DG business is still quite nascent, and distributed power allows us to be a bit more proactive in approaching clients and trying to develop projects. But Seleco is morphed into a number of things. So there's a little bit of utility maybe scattered in there, but at some point, I think everything will come under one umbrella. So I hope that helps to clarify.
And that area is a really interesting area because power has always been a challenge in the area, especially a lot of diesel gen sets and backup things. Was this kind of the impetus to get into that? Was the gas prices increasing and changing, or was there something else that drove you into that space?
Well, to be fair, that's definitely part of it, but that's now driving a lot today. I must say, when I started the company in 2019, cost of energy has always been high in the Caribbean region and the islands relative to other markets. But I have to say today, we're super busy. I mean, rather than us trying to knock on doors, for the first time, we're actually having people knock on our door, which is kind of cool for a startup, right? When you start to see that shift in the evolution of the business. But I also saw it. So before I came back to doing development as an entrepreneur, I also worked for a private equity fund that focused on Africa. And so looking at markets like Nigeria, South Africa markets, and even looking at off-grid solutions in places like Tanzania, where you will never hit that last mile, right? You're never going to build the transmission and distribution network to get to people in this remote village. The economics just don't stack up. So kind of taking inspiration from that and also seeing different business models coming out of Asia, Middle East, et cetera, then thought, well, why can't that be done in this region? And I thought, well, someone's going to do it. So why not be me? Why don't I give it a try? It's going to happen. And it's already happening. So yeah.
That's amazing, Angela. And it's so true, right? You see an opportunity and you're probably too early when you think about it or when you look at it, but it's inevitable, right? It's coming. I have to get in there. So do you think you were there a bit too early, a bit too late, just at the right time?
I mean, you never know. Hindsight's always 20/20, right? Ask me if we've gone bust in a year from now, or if we're actually thriving. That's the question, because we're still in that what we classify as, for every startup, there's something called a death zone, right? Where you're burning cash and you're not break even yet. We're still very much in that death zone, like making our way up Mount Everest. So let's see how it looks on the other side. But I would like to think that we were perhaps good on timing. The only thing that changed was really, COVID happened in 2020, and who would have been able to see or think that would effectively happen? I'd be curious to get your guys' opinions as well on this, and like James, because effectively the other thing is trying to time that the cost of solar, right? Cost of energy storage, that constant decline, and then all of a sudden it started to move back up, right? So and then cost of capital. So I don't know if you guys have a view as to the right timing, but yeah.
I don't know. In the middle of COVID feels like the exact wrong time to jump into it from a supply chain. But the interesting thing about that development timeline is sometimes it just works out. I mean, I had a project once and it ended up force majeuring for 7 years, and it became the most profitable project ever because by the time it got built, it was so far away that the supply chain and the cost got so low that the incentive on that PPA was so high that it was just a monumental success.
That's a successful force majeure.
but it was pure. There was no real foresight in it. Sometimes it just happens, right? And you just sort of follow that wave to where it takes you.
Exactly. And even with the evolution of our company, just so I thought it would look like one thing, and now it's looking like a different thing. So we started in Jamaica. We're now looking at projects in Barbados. We're now looking at projects in the Bahamas. We've got a call on something in Central America and Belize. And if you had asked me, I said, well, Belize, but it's changing. And I think that's part of the entrepreneurial journey is you have to adapt. You need to be willing to change. And if you're too stuck and you hold things too firm, then sometimes you miss opportunities.
It's a challenge always, right? Because as entrepreneurs, especially in the early days, you're in a yes mode, right? You say yes to almost everything. And as the company will grow up, you get to have a bit more focus, and you know what your sweet spot is, and you understand that better. That's like, okay, well, I deliver real value in this box right here. So if I find something over here, it's now easier to say no. But when you're just getting started, that box needs to be very big because you'll figure out where that sweet spot really is. So that's part of the journey. That's amazing.
And you're right, Etienne. I mean, we had one project that came to us that basically we started off with just solar only. We would have happily done some energy storage, but then they really wanted a gas solution. And we just didn't, I'm not saying it wasn't the right solution for them. I mean, I personally wouldn't have done it, but that's not our forte. So we didn't get that deal. It went to someone who actually has an integrated fossil fuel plus renewables solution, and that's okay. But at the beginning, yes, we were trying because we're a startup. We're like, let me check through my phone book and see who I know who actually does gas. Like, who can we bring on board to help us meet this? But it didn't sit with our values. And quite frankly, it really wasn't in our sweet spot. And it was a kind of a blessing in disguise that we're still, we didn't end up doing that one. But there are successful models which are a bit different to ours. And that's what makes the market so interesting.
I love it.
Speaking of models, the Soléco website talks about making things simple, and simplicity, James knows this very well, is hard. It's kind of counterintuitive, but to make things hard is you can't do that because the buyer journey is convoluted and so on. So you have to make things simple. So what are you focusing on to make the buying journey as simple as possible for your customers right now?
Copy paste, Control C, Control V. So keep it. So we have to bespoke our solution for the clients, that we can't really get around that. But keeping it simple, I think part of it is trying to make it as programmatic as possible. So like contracting, we've set up now, if you'd asked us maybe a few years ago, we didn't even have any of this infrastructure in place. We have EPC contracts that we have come pull off the shelf. We have all the deal contracts we can pull off the shelf. We have the relationships locally. So in terms of understanding the permitting process, so we do the permitting for our clients, and that helps to keep it simple for them, especially in these markets. Permitting sometimes is an art rather than a science. Your stuff gets, we had one client where we basically were permitting the project, and I kid you not, my associate called me and said, Angela, the thing we handed in about 3 months ago, they now say that it's left the building. I'm like, how does paper grow legs and walk out of the parish council? Like, that doesn't even happen. But then I had the relationship on tap where I could basically make a phone call, and remarkably, this thing decided to run right back into the office and showed up. So that's like helping to keep it simple. Is in a way we take a lot of the headache that our clients would typically have to take on board ourselves. And then in terms of the copy paste, we're doing it. The more we do it, is the better we get at it, the more efficient, the more relationships. So if you are a large industrial group and you're going to do solar for one site, and you may never, ever do a solar project ever again, why? So the learning curve to get up to speed, I see James like nodding his head. You might as well, if you have someone else willing to do it for you, who's done it before and is willing to also pay for it, why would you not just take that option?
I've given that advice to quite a few people I've run into over the years, where they're like, well, I just want to do one. And I'm like, hire someone that does this professionally. You don't want to go through this yourself, because in all the jurisdictions I've worked, I don't think I've ever seen one where it wasn't an art more than a science. Like there's people involved, right? Like that's the fundamental thing. There's people involved, there's communities involved, and there's politics involved. And that always makes it complicated, right? At the end of the day.
Exactly. Less simple. Yeah, exactly.
So you were talking earlier, so you're in Jamaica, Barbados, Belize, you're looking at Central America. So that's even more of a challenge to make things simple, right?
Yeah.
So you can have a simple design process, a simple internal client approval process, and so on. So how do you learn a new market quickly to make it simple for your clients?
So, we always start with regulation, and we also pick and choose which markets we want to go to. There's some markets where we just are like, if we don't see visibility of pipeline beyond a certain scale, we're like, we leave that to someone else. We're not there to take everything. We're there to take the ones that we think we have the best approach to and the ability to add the most value. So I have a team, including a very legal person who's far more competent than I am. And the first step, read the regulation, boring as it is, which is why I have somebody else read it. Just pull the Electricity Act, pull the license, go on the government website. Let's get some relationships with the regulators. Let's have some phone calls with them, exchange emails, and just understand what can we do, what can we not do. That's kind of the first step. And then beyond that, then there's obviously the commercial side. So let's look at the market. What does it look like? Who are the types of clients? And ideally for us, what's happened is we have clients that are multi-jurisdictional. So our preference would be that if we have a very good client that we want to sign with, and they just happen to have a business operation in another market, we would then try to go there with them. And so that makes it easier because it at least eliminates part of the commercial side of it where you're already doing it anyways. So the incremental learning is more two things, one on the regulation side, but then also on the implementation. The implementation, you'll need to ask me in the next podcast because we haven't done it yet in the other. So that will be interesting because we have contractors we work with, but some of the EPC contractors may not go to those markets or they may not have the relationship. So what we do selfishly is leverage them. Like if they want to go to that market, they learn the market. It's not, we don't build projects. We don't deal with the construction. I mean, we oversee it, but I'm more than happy to pay someone. So back to your point, James, if someone is paying us for development expertise and financing expertise, we will pay the EPC contractor for them to learn the market and how to implement the project. And so for instance, in one market that we're looking at right now, we are getting pipeline. The origination is actually coming from a local EPC contractor. And provided they meet all the checklists in terms of balance sheet, quality, and contract, we don't want to do your business. You are better than we are. You do your business. You bring the deals to us and we will plug the gap that will enable you to do more projects, which in their case was basically our client may not have the capital to hand immediately, but if you guys can come in and meet that gap, it's win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's an exciting model, actually. Have you found that you got dragged into most of these markets through partners or through clients that you had? Because you've expanded quite a lot, and is it the same or is it a little bit of both?
Bit of both, but mainly clients. I'd say mainly clients.
Good.
So I try to chase the offtake, if that makes sense. I start with where the money's going to come from first. So I chase the offtake first.
Fair enough. Makes sense. It's easier to finance if you know where you're getting paid from, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So one of the things, and we had a brief talk a long time ago about your first project that you ever did, but I want to see if I can drag this even further back. How did you make that jump from like, I'm in a PE, like wearing a suit every day, doing that to like, I'm going to dive into the trenches and be a developer?
Honestly, James, I wish I said that it was an active decision. It was a bit random, so and taking all the way back. So I was working at Goldman and I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So it wasn't necessarily that I chose a developer path. It was more that I chose a path of wanting to create something that was my own, something to create something from scratch. And so there's one day in the office where I looked around and, well, there were several days and I was thinking, this is a great learning environment and I'm very happy for it. But when I look at the guy in the corner office, do I want to be him? And it usually was a him. There weren't many women anyways, but do I want to be that guy? And I thought, perhaps not. Let me at least give it a shot because I believe we're all writing our own story, writing our own books. And I wouldn't want to read my story where I didn't even try. It can fail. It may not work out. It doesn't always work out. Quite frankly, for me, the first time I tried, it didn't work out either. And I, with my tail between my legs, had to go back and find a job. There's nothing wrong with finding a job. And, but I kind of took that leap of faith and then started searching. And the reason I wouldn't advise anyone to necessarily quit cold turkey the way I did, because it's actually very, very hard. But I knew with that type of work and the hours I was working, I mean, I was all, it's 90 to 100 hour weeks that I was doing in banking. I couldn't find the mental space to find something else, to do the searching. Some people are able to do that, or some people find their opportunity within that 90 to 100 hours. But for me, I needed to kind of take a step back. And sometimes people get fired, and that's actually a blessing in disguise. Someone forces you, drops you in the swimming pool, and you have to go, figure it out yourself.
I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah, no.
Ouch.
I'm fortunate, but I can imagine that would, James is funny. So that's kind of how I fell into it. And in terms of development, I'd always loved traveling, even from my uni days. I'm free spirit. I've been to almost 80 countries with a backpack, hustling, meeting people. And as a single, as a woman traveling on your own, you kind of, that element of building, being street smart and instinct and adventure, I always liked that. And so the development world has a tinge of that. And then I was able to blend that with the skill set which I developed in banking.
So brings me to a great question. Are you geographically challenged? Because you're based in London, running a business in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Like, hasn't the weather pulled you to the Caribbean already?
So, well, today is actually hotter in London than it is in Jamaica. We're
Wow.
having
That's a whole
heat
other
wave.
discussion, I'm sure.
No, that's a whole like climate change chat. But no, so
Yeah.
I travel quite a lot. But would you believe it's easier to get to Barbados from London than it is to get to Barbados from Jamaica, unless you manage to get that occasional direct flight? So there are a couple advantages and yes, disadvantages of being so far away. It's kind of not all rosy, but I don't think it's all bad. The advantage of being in London is I think it gives me perspective. It gives me a global perspective of seeing where like Europe is more advanced. Let's call a spade a spade. It's far more advanced than the Caribbean, right? In terms of where things are going. So effectively you're getting a crystal ball. I'm living in a crystal ball of where things are going to be or maybe in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Like literally they're ahead. So that for me is really important because if I'm based in country, I find that sometimes being based in country all year round, you're not getting that perspective. You're just not seeing things. And so I think it's important for your repertoire of what you do and just expansion of your creativity that you're seeing more. The second element is that I think it's good in terms of raising capital to be in kind of London, in a big, big city, big capital base. You're able to meet people, you can meet funds. London's great for that, as would be places like New York or out of Asia. And then also in terms of talent, I have talent that I've sourced locally because that is the right talent for the role. But sometimes there's talent over here. And so our team is actually mixed of people who are from London, and then we have a team that's locally based. And I think that actually works really well. And then the other thing I would say is a bit easier to get meetings with like politicians and things like that because, oh, you're coming in from London or you're coming from overseas and you're only going to be there for 2 weeks or 1 week versus if you're there all the time and you happen to pass them at the local, cafe and I can see you anytime. So there's this, it may be odd to say this, but I think there's this mystique and cachet for being unavailable because it's effectively supply demand. I think if there's too much supply, it affects your pricing. So if you're a little bit more not there all the time, they don't really know you, don't really understand you, but you're there enough that they can trust you and they know that you're not there. You're not what we would classify when I did my African PE. You're not like a suitcase businessman, right? Or a briefcase where you just pop in and out, but you're not invested really in the market. So that's a balance that I try to strike. And then I see James is smiling, or I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. You can disagree with me.
No,
I love it.
I'm notorious for having said too many times, I will be in X city that week, where I had nothing booked to be in that city that week whatsoever. But I'm trying to get a meeting with person X.
Yeah.
And I know that person X is in that city that week. So, oh, you're going to be in New York next week? Yes, me too. How's Wednesday? Like, go online, book plane tickets, come back. Yes, perfect. I'll see you at 2.
And that's why I was laughing because I knew that was he's done that for years, right? and that's exactly it. And well, I mean, like it's like SPI, right? Everybody's like, oh, everybody's gonna be at SPI, and then everybody just crams everything into that, right? And it makes it really easy. And everybody makes meetings, and everybody's like, okay, we got a week to make deals happen. Yeah. Like, and then all of a sudden everybody's in that mindset to make deals happen. And that kind of setting up the situation for success, right?
Exactly. A bit of a pressure brother, because otherwise it could drag on forever. You know, there's even just on my personal life basis, I don't see friends in London. You know, I see friends who are coming through more easily than I have friends who are living here. Friends I'm living here, you have to book like 3 months in advance because they're just, oh, well, you're here, so we'll see you. But when I have a friend who's like, I am coming in from New York and I will be there for 2 days, I'd be like, I will make the time. I will meet with you. Yeah.
So word to the wise, be scarcely available. I think that's a lesson. No, but like I love the supply and demand kind of mention, but for your own time. I think we talk a lot about supply and demand with products, with services and so on, but think about it, applying that to your own time in a business development perspective, I think is very interesting. So thanks for bringing that forward, Angela. And you talked about yourself personally, and I saw that you're a climber, which is awesome. I myself climbed a lot.
Okay.
You're also a pilot,
Yeah.
which brings me to the question, didn't you think you should be going into the drone business as a pilot?
That's really fun. So yeah, no, I guess I could, but no. So really, to be fair, what I wanted to be when I was growing up, like if you ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I had moments where I wanted to be a classical musician, but I wasn't good enough. But I did audition, I didn't get it. So that's fine. But then when I went to uni, I'd always had this thing for like action people. So you maybe get this tinge of like adventure. So I actually wanted to be like a CIA agent or one of those like James Bondy types. Indiana Jones for me was just my personal childhood hero. And so I remember when I was at uni at Harvard, and they came to recruit, the CIA came to recruit, and so did FBI, et cetera. So I dropped off my CV and immediately I got dinged. And I was like, why have I got dinged? They're like, well, you're not American. You're not an American citizen. You weren't born here. And I was like, what? You have to be born. They're like, yes, this is a role for American citizens. And so I thought, okay, I guess I need to reconsider the career path. But I've kept on board. I love things that are mechanical. Perhaps I haven't flown, well, I've flown like toy drones and things like that. But I like precision and I like focus, because I think with like, so you're right, I love motorbikes, even though my partner had me sell my motorcycle for safety reasons. But I love motorbikes, even playing the piano. All of those elements are very precise focus, and you go into almost, at least for me, like a meditative state of hyper focus. And even with climbing, I guess, Etienne, I don't know if you can relate to this, but even with climbing, if you're a technical climber, even more so if you're rock climbing or bouldering, there's like this mode of trance that you go into and you are just focused on that. Because if you're not focused on that, chances are things happen. Things don't go your way.
And everything else goes away, right?
Yeah.
Focus is so important in all aspects of life. I tend, like how we juggle priorities is tougher, and actually when you're focusing on something, other things come into context, which you may have not thought about because you're in that moment and you're focused on that, which is the beauty of being an entrepreneur, because you're focusing and you're trying to solve one, ideally one problem, and by focusing on that you can become better. And so, focus, precision, because on a project, if you're missing one part of the process, like as development processes are not entirely linear. If you're missing land, which that's a big one, but if you're missing one permit sometimes, or an interconnection, if you're distribute, like there's the things that you can have everything, but missing one thing, and that one thing sinks the whole thing.
Agreed.
But I think it's an interesting thing, and it's all these distractions and other things you've talked about that are outside the business, and that focus on that's really interesting. There's a famous quote from Isaac Asimov. I don't know if you know that he was a scientist and a science fiction writer, but he always talked about something called the eureka moment. And he talked about it. He's like, when I really ran into a tough problem, the best thing to do was not to focus on the problem I was trying to solve, and go off and do something. And it could be climbing, it could be flying, that took my mind completely away with it. Because he had this theory that in the back of his mind still worked on that problem. And then he'd come out of whatever he was doing in that like hyper focus thing, like climbing or stuff like that. And all of a sudden he'd have new solutions to that problem that he could go out and try. And so that's always been one of those pieces I've liked too, is sometimes the right answer is to put the problem down and walk away from it.
You're right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, James. Like that eureka moment or a moment of clarity, for me, sometimes it's as simple as just go for a run, because I sometimes just run it out, focus on other things. And don't worry, not all of my sports are all active. I have taken up more gardening. No, I have this thing now for gardening. It must mean that I'm getting
gardening
old.
Is not a sport, Angela.
I know.
Gardening is not a sport.
No,
it is the way I do
it. A sport.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's a whole level.
It's a whole other level of sport. But I really enjoy gardening. And I think part of that also comes back to maybe even the entrepreneurial journey that we're discussing, that element of fostering something, caring for something, seeing it grow or change. And in the case of the UK with the heat wave we've been having, see it die. And then because my partner didn't water it. He's probably going to listen to this podcast and be so upset with me, but seeing it be, and then examine it to see if there's still any roots. And I'm like, yes, this thing is still alive. And then you have to have that, again, focus and dedication to it to nurse it back to coming, to coming back to life. So it's interesting. I think in a way, all my hobbies, and it sounds like actually you're a climber as well. I don't know, James, what hobbies you have. I know you're a closet gardener. Come on.
I'm definitely a gardener. I've got an incessant amount of plants outside in my tiny place in Toronto.
Okay.
And my partner doesn't water it either, if it makes you feel any better. So
Okay.
Neither does mine. I had to automate it. That's the safest way to do it.
Yes. Irrigation system.
I'm not really, Jade is not surprised at that. I try to automate everything that I can. So watering plants is one of those things.
Keep it simple,
right?
You kept it simple.
I think we got a theme to this podcast today.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
But simplicity and focus are recipes for success. If you're overcomplicating something, you're not doing it right. And I love that, Angela, you guys are taking on the complexity for your clients, going through it, and then in time, you'll see how the commonalities and how you can automate certain things or how you can streamline certain things. That can become even more products in the future or different value propositions you can even offer. So I think that's natural. I think evolution to any business. Like if you take on the complexity, you'll work through it, you'll bang your head on the wall, and it's like, there has to be a better way. Yeah. And that brings us to our eureka moments, as James referred to earlier, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting time. But I think we're almost out of time here. So I think we'd like to say thank you very much for joining us and staying up late to join us from England there, Angela. It's an awesome time. Great stories, lots of laughs.
No, and thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I've also learned from you guys as well. And Etienne, I'll see you on the climbing circuit.
On the climbing circuit, yes, for sure. It'll be great to kind of go back out there. I haven't climbed that actively for a while, but my claim to fame is my climbing partner not telling me that I had a spot on an Everest expedition because I was entering business school and he didn't want to derail my education. Which ended up being the right decision, all in all. But
Everest is still there. The last I checked, it's still there.
It's still there.
It's still there.
But we have to be mindful of Everest and all the different glaciers that are out there that we can climb, because unfortunately,
some of them will not be there. If you don't take
care, there's not a lot that's going to be left, unfortunately. So
I know.
Happy that you're with us fighting the good fight, Angela. Hashtag decarbonization. And let's go. So wish you lots of success, Angela, and thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Bye.
All right. Bye.